Welcome back. I've got Bill Benjamin online. Bill, how are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
Looking forward to this conversation. You're doing some amazing work, and we're going to talk about something called the last 8%. And boy, oh boy, is that a very important percent to address. So, why don't you share a little bit about you, and then we'll jump into the conversation.
Yeah, I mean, my story is I have degrees in mathematics and computer science, and I struggled. I got promoted because I was decent at my job. I struggled as a leader, and I got exposed to this work that I'm going to talk about today many, many years ago, and it really helped me. It helped me be a better leader. It also, quite frankly, helped me in my personal life. So that's just a little bit of my story.
Beautiful. Yeah, it's important work, and you're not alone. So many of us are really good at what we do, and all of a sudden they say, "Well, you can run the department now." And like, how do I run a department? How do I run people? How do I schedule? How do you're pretty good at doing it yourself, but then when you add oh, there's other human beings involved. Oh, wow, that's going to make it a little wrinkly. So it's definitely one of those things that too many managers unfortunately get thrown into that mix, and I wish it was different, but that's why there's people like you in the world to help make that change. So let's dive into a little bit of that work and that research that you came across when you were thrown into the mix of okay how to lead and manage a team and all of that. So what's a little bit of the research about? And then obviously you'd mentioned in the pre-show it caught the eye of Harvard Business Review, so definitely want to jump into that as well.
Yeah, I mean, I'm proud to say that what I'm about to share is the subject of a Harvard Business Review article that was recently out. We've been doing this work for, 20, 25 years. But what changed for us about 7 or 8 years ago, is we were working with two executives, at a large company, and they weren't getting along, like that ever happens. And they were coached by us to have a conversation with each other about the impact they were having. So they go and have the conversation. They come back from the conversation, and the coaches individually ask them how did it go, and they both say, "Oh, it went fine." Well, the coach knows better, so the coach pushed a little more and said, "Yeah, but did you say everything we said you were going to say?" And both of them said essentially, "I got 85, 90, 95% of the way there in the conversation. The other guy started reacting, and I reacted and I held back. I didn't really step in and say that last 5 or 10%." And so many people have that experience that we did a survey or study of 34,000 people and determined that on average, people feel they leave 7.56%, which we rounded up to 8%. They leave that unsaid in a difficult conversation. So that's where the concept of the last 8% came from. As we workshopped that, people said, well, it isn't just difficult conversations, there's also the tough decisions. There's the easy ones where everyone's going to be happy and everyone's getting along, but then there's the ones where, maybe I'm taking a risk, I might fail, or someone's not going to be happy. Those are the tougher decisions. So we coined this term, the last 8%, to talk about those tougher things that we have to deal with.
It reminds me of a situation where I had a tough decision and conversations. I was running a multi-site healthcare clinic, and we had mental health workers, and we had two main sites that we pretty much housed. We had four of these social workers, and they were bouncing between the offices all the time. A lot of travel. It didn't make a lot of sense because I thought, well, we've got two offices in each location. Why don't we just put two people static at those offices all the time so they don't go back and forth? And distance wise from the offices, it's maybe an 8-minute drive. So it wasn't like it was clear across. It wasn't like I had one office in Burlington and the other one in Ajax. And
Gotcha.
so
Yeah.
yeah, they were close together. So I did that, and you thought that I shot everybody's spouses. I mean, the doctors were in an uproar, the staff was unhappy, even though it made sense for those people because they preferred those offices. Because I asked
Yeah.
them, what office would, if you were going to work in what office, which one would you prefer and why? So I said, okay, it's that. And went, and it was like even to the point where the doctors came up with a petition, and they had a bunch of doctors sign it, doing that. So I went to my board chair and I said, look. I'm not willing to go out on the plank on this one. If they want it this way, fine. I just looked at it to make it easier for
Mhm.
the team, consistency for the patients, because sometimes they see, one of the clinicians twice a week. So, okay, one day they got to go to this office, one day they got to go to that office. A lot of times they forgot and they went to the wrong one. It's like just to ease things up and get a little more stability. And then that way, instead of using a hoteling kind of situation, they would have their own office and they could do whatever they want to with it. And the board chair said, I'm backing you on this one. It's a good
Hmm.
thing, but why don't we do this? Float it, say, let's try it for 6 months and see how it goes. Okay, that was in 2017. I left that organization about a year and a half later.
Yeah.
Last time I checked, those social workers were still at those same offices. So I guess they didn't want to change it back, or they felt, wow, this actually makes sense. Sometimes people won't see,
Yeah.
the forest through the trees kind of thing. They don't see the bigger picture on this, even though I articulated it, but they weren't hearing it. They were closed-minded, and I don't think they held back that 7%. Maybe they did. Yeah, I would be curious if they did, because I'd really like to hear what they thought, but I could sense it anyway. But for me, it's like, I'm not willing to die on the vine on this one. But
Yeah.
the board chair said, no, we're going to do this. And I'm like, okay. So, and it did, and it worked. But, there were other decisions I made that I thought would go, horribly wrong, and they went well. So you got to be in there, but you have to have those tough conversations, like you said, and an openness to hit that last 8%. And like you said, majority of people, they leave it in the tank, and what goes unsaid tends to fester, and it can grow into something you don't want it to grow into.
Absolutely. And I love that example. And I'm going to pick up on two things. One is that it demonstrates the importance of these last 8% moments. They have an outsized influence on others, and that's because of the cortisol effect. And the cortisol effect is that when there's tension, pressure, uncertainty, conflict, cortisol gets released, which causes memories to sear in. So people remember what you were doing in those last 8% moments. They don't remember what you're doing in the 92% of moments when everyone was getting along and the deadlines were being met. They remember those last 8% moments. So those people, you remember that to this day, and it's almost like it's stored in our emotional memory. You can actually feel some of the emotion of it, however many years later it is. So that's one thing is these last 8% a decision like that, they have an outsized influence. So that makes these last 8% moments even more important. Um, the second thing you mentioned is the idea that, well, maybe they did go to their last 8%. And there's really two predictable default behaviors that people have. One is the avoidance. And in our research, that's 68% of people, their predictable default behavior is to avoid. But what about the other 32%? Well, I fall into that category sometimes. I'm in a difficult conversation. The other person's starting to react. Rather than stepping back, I'm stepping in, but I'm coming on too strong and I'm making a mess of it. So we talk about people either being avoiders or make a messers in a last 8% moment. And so it sounds like some of those folks that you were dealing with might have been make a messers. So one
Oh,
thing we often ask people is to really reflect, do I tend to be more of an avoider, make a messer? Now, of course, life is more complex than a simple binary choice like that. There's some situations where maybe a senior leader is challenging you, you might be more likely to avoid. But I don't know about you, but when my teenage daughters are yelling, I'm more likely to yell back and make a mess. So it can also be situational.
Oh yeah, or with our spouses or their kids. Yeah, especially when the teenage years hit, and that's when they know everything, right? That's what I remember from mine when they were in the teens. It's like, yeah, they knew everything, which was good. I wish I just should have hired them as mentors. Okay, since you know everything, how do I navigate this thing with the doctors? They actually may have had a decent answer. I don't know. I didn't approach that. I'm not going to go back in time to change it because I've lived that. Don't need to live it again. But I think what sounds like in a lot of the work you do is there's a lot of frameworks that are in place to kind of help this to, again, tap into that 8%, but also that 68 and 32% mechanism as well, going, okay. And what I find a lot when working with people and teams is how blissfully unaware that they're doing it. They
Yes.
don't even recognize it. I mean, subconsciously they know, but consciously they're like, "No, I'm not avoiding. I think I've said everything." And you're like, I don't think so." But or they like you said, the cortisol kicks in, and all of a sudden they're and the amygdala starts yelling, and it's like
Yeah.
either fight or flight.
Yeah.
And a lot of people kind of go, I'm not dealing with this." But other people are like, "Well, the bear's not going to poke itself."
Yeah.
So, and then they go in, and it's like, oh boy, I love walking into those situations, going,
Yeah.
okay, well, all right, okay, I'm going to put the fire extinguisher down now. We've got it under control to a point. It's just hopefully nothing reignites, but let's okay. What happened?
And you've got a really good point about kind of last 8% isn't only an individual thing, although we all face our last 8% moments, it's also a team thing. So how teams handle their last 8% moments has a huge impact on the ultimate performance of that team. And we did another study, this time of 72,000 people, to look at teams and culture. And by the way, one thing, this is from some other research, we know is that culture doesn't exist across an organization. It actually exists on teams. So you can have different cultures on different teams in an organization. And so we identified that there's two key pillars of a high performing culture. One is high connection. That's what most people think of when they think of culture. There's people feel valued, they have a voice, there's trust and high care. But what a lot of people miss is the second key pillar, which is high courage, the ability to do difficult things, to step into last 8% moments. And we took those two pillars and we created a culture map. On one axis is courage, on the other axis is connection. And by the way, I can let folks know how they can download this map after this session. It's also in the Harvard Business Review article. But if you think of a culture that's high courage but low connection, that's a transactional culture where results matter over relationships. Bad behavior is allowed to exist. It's a high anxiety, high burnout, more of a make a mess environment. It can get results over the short term, but it's not sustainable over the long term. Now, in a culture that is in our lower right hand quadrant, that is the opposite, it's high connection but low courage. That's a family culture. It's a nice culture, but people are unwilling to do hard things. People are avoiding. There's no accountability. There's lower standards for performance. Decision making takes forever because you've got to make everyone happy and everybody's got to be included. And there are lots of positive things about a family culture. And again, in our research, 37% of teams have a family culture, but it's not enough to be high performing. We like to say, you're not actually a family. You don't fire your lowest performing kid. Um, you might want to some days, but you don't. The goal, the aspiration is the upper right hand quadrant in this culture map where it's high care, where it's high connection and high courage, which is characterized by high accountability and high care. And both can exist together. And so that's a highly innovative, there's risk taking, it's feedback rich. That's the kind of culture where people are in their last 8% moments showing up with both high care and high accountability. They're not avoiding, they're stepping into those tough situations, but they're not making a mess. It's that middle ground. I mean, everyone's not perfect, but they do much better. And so that's the second part of the research that I wanted to share is that culture map and the idea that, whether you are the leader of a team or on a team, you can influence the culture on your team.
It reminds me of a internet startup that I worked for back in the .com days,
Mm,
and it was both those things. We had the courage, we made mistakes, we had those difficult conversations, but we were all having a blast doing
mm,
it. It was just from the CEO all the way down was it just absolutely it was it had elements of togetherness and a family feel. It was just
mhm.
a wonderful 2 or 3 years that I was there, and then they ultimately grew even bigger and went public, and the temperature changed there, and they've had some turnover and some challenges. But I remember we were at one of our retreats where the entire organization, it was still relatively small at that point, but I think we'd grown to like 300 employees at that point.
Mm,
I was, I think, employee number 32. So it was
sure.
needless to say, the lineup at the coffee machine got longer. And so it's like we need another coffee machine. There's too many people here. But I remember in particular, we had just lost a big client. And of
Mm,
course, doesn't matter how healthy an organization is, that grapevine gets fed, and by the time it gets to the 10th person, it's like they're closing up shop and selling
right.
everything, and they're going to
Of
have
course.
you have to get a second mortgage to help pay for everything else, kind of thing. So we're at this retreat, and finally the CEO comes up, and he's talking about this. It's like, well, I want to address the elephant in the room. And he named the company that is now no longer in existence. It went out of business, but it was a big .com company at the time. And he goes, I don't give a shit about .com. And the crowd, we all erupted in laughter and cheers. It's like, we're fine. Don't worry about it. We
Mm,
got you. Go do what you do best. That's all he said. That's the only thing he said all night. And everybody, it just all of a sudden it changed the temperature and we had a blast
Yeah.
that night. And that's all he did is he just created the environment. It's like, look, here's a tough conversation. I don't care. It's
Yeah.
like it doesn't matter to us. We're going to pick up 10 customers that are going to be bigger than them. And they did, and they grew, and everything turned out really well for them. But I'll never forget that. That was the catchphrase for a good year for us. Anytime something would come up, we'd say, I don't give a shit about, and
Yeah.
it was just comical, and it also improved and removed kind of a barrier, that subliminal
Yep.
barrier between the rank and file and leadership. It went away, and then people just went up to him like they were a colleague, best buddy kind of thing like that. And that was his demeanor anyway. That's what he
Yeah.
wanted. And by saying that, it broke down all kinds of barriers, and it was an absolutely fun place to work.
Mm. I love that example of the CEO sharing, just saying that because so we have an assessment where we can assess where an organization or team is on the culture map. Are they more transactional? Are they more family? Are they last 8%? And by the way, only 33% of teams are in last 8%, so it's not easy. But one of the questions that most teams score low on is we name inconvenient truths, difficult to discuss issues on this team. And when inconvenient truths aren't named, then the issue isn't solved. And there's a meeting after the meeting to talk about what wasn't said in the meeting. Where in your example, he just went straight at it. He brought up the inconvenient truth. We lost this client. He addressed it right away. That's a great example. So when we work with teams, that's one of the things we talk about is how do you create norms on the team where these difficult things are named. There's not the elephant in the room. There's not the unspoken truth. There's not the meeting after the meeting. And again, those are last 8% moments for people because it is hard often to name something that might upset people or might challenge the status quo or so it's hard. So again, it comes back to that ability for people to step in skillfully into those last 8% moments and give somebody feedback or name an inconvenient truth.
It takes courage,
Exactly.
and at all levels. And it's not just, well, we'll wait for the leader to do it. As an employee, you got to somehow, step up and speak your truth. And I know for a lot of people, they're afraid because, well, they don't want to lose their job because that's not a comfortable experience. I know
Yep.
that personally. I've also known how wonderful, I say that sarcastically, it feels to let somebody go. I hate it.
No,
I despise it.
absolutely
Even
not.
if they were the just the worst employee ever. Not as a human, but just they're just not. It's like completely wrong fit or making things really bad. It's disruptive, but you have to lean into it. And it's always those things like whenever I sense, okay, I'm got some apprehension about this. I've learned over the years, wish I would have learned it a lot earlier, but I've learned like, okay, I need to lean into this a little bit more. If I'm apprehensive about this, why? What is it? And I kind of
Yeah.
take a step back and just kind of look at what's going on here. Why am I afraid to have this conversation or approach this or write this note or take on this client or what is it? What's
Yeah.
going on? And this usually there's, a past memory or an experience that comes to
Yeah.
mind that says it's going to be me again. And usually it's not. Sometimes it could,
Yeah.
history may not repeat itself, but it certainly rhymes. And it's like, but
Yeah, and it's fear. It's fear that holds people back because if I told you that conversation is going to go great, your boss is going to love you and thank you for the feedback, you wouldn't have any trouble doing it. So it's fear that it's not going to go well. And what we talk about is the idea that you want to you're trading short-term discomfort and anxiety of avoiding something for long-term regret because we do tend to know when we aren't speaking our truth, when we aren't dealing with things. And again, it's about finding that middle ground where you push through that discomfort, yet you approach it skillfully so you don't make a mess. And there are tools and skills that we teach to help people step into those last 8% moments with both courage and connection. And so the good news is there are learnable skills that people can learn to be more effective in their last 8% moments and build a high performing culture on their teams.
so here's an example or a question I have and wrapping up. So you find yourself, you've just made a mess of a situation. Now, what should you do? What are some steps that can kind of help diffuse that. Doesn't mean it's going to remove the sting or the pain, but what are some things you can do to own it and go forward on that to hopefully turn the tide so you tend to shift more into that 68% instead of 32%.
Yeah. I mean, it's really about taking ownership. It's really about being vulnerable. And, I've said to my daughters many times, hey, daddy got upset. I shouldn't have. I'm sorry. And then just taking ownership and acknowledging we're all not perfect, right? And so when you're not perfect, just take ownership. I mean, people really appreciate that. And by the way, and acknowledge the impact of the person. And I know that impacted you. And by the way, that doesn't mean that they didn't do something that you need to share. But if you start, we call it seeking contribution, and you seek your contribution first. Because if you seek your contribution, if you take ownership, most people will then, in kind, say, well, you know what, yeah, I probably could have this, or I probably should have, not done this. So it's that vulnerability, which actually, some people have perceived as weakness. Actually, it takes courage to do that. It actually takes strength and courage to be vulnerable. But it's just so powerful.
Yeah, I remember in closing, I had hired a nurse at one of the clinics that I worked at, and bad fit. Just, I mean, on paper, the references, everything was, spot on, going to be a great fit, and was just not at all. So, using a Jack Welch term, dehired her as quickly as I possibly could.
Mm,
And I remember going to the board of directors who I reported to, and I said, yeah, this one, I just completely missed this one. I'm take full ownership on this one. I should have sent something. I didn't. I missed it. But we've made the change and all of that, and yeah, I feel bad about this. And one of the board members said, Mike, Ted Williams only got a hit 4 out of every 10 at bats.
right.
He's in the Hall of Fame.
Yeah.
You're gonna have a misstep. You've look at all the people you've hired here that are just absolutely amazing. Said there's gonna be one that's gonna not be great. That's fine. It's a
Oh,
lesson
hiring
you
is
learn.
such a crapshoot. Absolutely. No matter
Oh
how
yeah.
hard you try,
Oh
no matter
yeah.
what you do.
Oh yeah. I mean, I've hired people that were all-star employees, and then something personal happened to them in their lives, and they turned into an absolutely horrible employee. And it's sad to see, but it was the reality of it. Okay, because everybody brings baggage to work every day. So, love this conversation, Bill. Where can people find out more about you? Link to the Harvard Business Review report, the map, anything else you want to share?
Yeah, yeah. So they can go to ihhp.com, Institute for Health and Human Potential. That's my company. They can look for me, Bill Benjamin, on LinkedIn, and they can go to Harvard Business Review and look up the article. It's called The Secret of Building High-Performing Teams. And by the way, you don't have to have a subscription. Harvard Business Review gives everyone 5 free articles a month. You just need to sign up for an account. So you can get that article and 4 others a month at no charge.
Yeah, I'll definitely have that in the show notes. And I don't get anything from Harvard Business Review, but I encourage people to subscribe. They do some amazing work and research, and I know a few people that work with them. So, give them the support they need so they can continue highlighting great work like what you're doing with your team, Bill. So, thanks again for being on the show. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.